everyone. This is Dr. Kamani, licensed clinical psychologist. Thank you for tuning in. We are here to talk again about Black women and toxic work environments. And we've been having this conversations for about a year now. I started this about a year in terms of my own healing journey, in terms of dealing with a toxic work environment. And I decided to start talking about it because, number one, I don't want other Black women to feel like it doesn't happen to them, that they're alone in that. And I also want other Black women to know that healing is possible. So for the past year, I've had different guests on talking about, their experiences in toxic work environments and the ways that they've been healing. And so today I have a very special guest, and we are going to go into a conversation talking about not only Black women in toxic work environments, but also the healing in relation to that. And the reason that we're having these conversations also is that unfortunately, Black women have higher rates of experiencing toxic work environments. And we know that the research is showing us that unfortunately, Black women are now dying at earlier ages because of external stresses, such as being in a toxic job. So today we have a very special guest, Carolyn Coleridge, who is a licensed clinical social worker. I'm going to turn it over to her to briefly introduce herself.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Carolyn Coleridge. I've been a licensed therapist for 27 years, and I've been licensed in New York, New Jersey. Now it's California and Connecticut. So I've moved around a lot. And I have a healing center in Connecticut. I teach meditation and mindfulness. I'm also an intuitive healer. So I do energy healing, which also helps the soul. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So as we're getting started to the conversation, I'm just curious in terms of your experience in terms of as a therapist, as well as your own personal experiences or professional experiences of toxic work environments. So what are some of the themes that you've heard, or what are some of the themes that you've experienced as well?
So, when I worked at a major HMO, I did the work stress group, and working in work stress in this area, there was about 75% African Americans, and a lot of them were Black women. And there was a lot of it was harassment, racism, belittling, changing hours, just horrible experiences. And they were really having a hard time over and over, would hear these stories. And what happens is that in the other people that are working the group with me, they wouldn't, in another group, they really address racism. They're like, well, how do you change your thoughts? And how do you do CBT? How do you do this? And I'm like, wait a minute, we need to hear these stories.
Yes.
Because the reason when we hold them in, this is why Black people, especially Black women, have high blood pressure. And the silencing and belittling and minimizing and, is making it really difficult. So they gave me this mindfulness group. I actually got it through Spirit. I prayed and everything because I'd walk in the room. There were 35 people in the group. 30 of them were Black women. And, or maybe 25 Black women, 5 Black men, and the rest other groups. And it was just so ridiculous. And then the people that were running the groups weren't people of color, and they would silence them. So I skillfully got myself to teach mindfulness in the group. I asked Spirit to help me, and I got in there. And I said, we're going to meditate, but first I want to hear your stories. So then I really just said, okay, go ahead and talk about it. What happened? And the level of racism was unbelievable. And some things that I said to them that really helped them, it's like, they're like, why are there so many of us in here? Why is this happening? I said, historically, we've worked for free, like we were slaves and, we worked, our bodies were commodities. We weren't human. And we were, really like put in, like that we have no rights, we have no respect, we have no voice. And even if it's consciously or unconsciously, there's this strain of energy that comes through that really is like, you're not valuable, you're not important. And if you're a visible double minority, Black and female, you have coming from both different sides. I've had women that work in IT that went through it. They were engineers. They went through it because they were the only women working in groups or working in social services or other places where like and then what's interesting, some of the communities they were working with were mostly people of color, in social services and other, and then they would be silenced. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. Like at the clinic where I worked at, it was 75% in that area, Black people. And when I started, we had 1.5 Black therapists out of 40. I was
Wow.
25. They hired me at halftime on purpose. And it
Mm.
was interesting, talk about personal harassment. They wouldn't, my schedule was set up so I couldn't go into meetings. So like so I wouldn't be in the meeting to talk. And I was like, I felt at first, is this personal? Is this really like particular? Like I'm not in
Mhm.
meetings. And even my manager, because in another location where I went through severe harassment, same company, where I actually had to leave, and that's where I got more into my spiritual journey.
Mm.
I think she heard about it. So it's like it followed me, and she said, oh, by the way, you can always go back to medical if this doesn't work out. This is her, my welcoming, not like, hi, how
Wow.
are you? We're so excited we have a person of color when 75% of the patients are Black. It was
Right.
like, no, like, oh, so, why don't you, you can always go back to the location, or, we don't have trouble here. And then I had found out that they had a huge lawsuit by a Black psychiatrist prior.
Wow. Isn't that something? Isn't
So
that
there it
something?
is. And
Yeah.
oh,
Uh-huh.
mhm.
Go on, Carolyn.
Oh, you know how I found out, and
Hmm.
this is how I got into the spiritual stuff, is when my manager kept pushing and pushing these little, like, microaggressions and, things to get me to talk about, racism, or say like these mean things. Like, for example, I was like, well, we should have a Black women's group. She goes, I don't care about the minorities. But of course, nobody was around to hear that. Or, like, we don't want you to do that kind of group here. And even my coworker, who is a gay male, he's like, I have a gay group. Like, why can't you have a Black women's group? And so many,
Right.
it's just really unbelievable. But I said, why is this happening? This is before I knew about the lawsuit. And it was so
Hmm.
ironic is I was at Starbucks, and this woman comes up to me. I worked at another location, and it was a person of color. And she's like, hey, where have you been? I said, oh, I'm working over here now. She's like, oh, she grabbed her cough. She says, let me sit down. She said, oh, did you know about that lawsuit there? And I'm like, no. And the other location, she goes, let me tell you, it's a Black woman. And I was like, that's why they're trying to silence me before I even got started.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
so every time, so then she told me the whole story. I never saw her again. I worked with her
Mm.
before, but I thought it was an intervention by spirit. And that's, I felt,
Yes.
I'm here for a reason. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
And it's so important for us to connect to the reason that we're here or we're in a certain situation, because sometimes we can go down this rabbit hole, like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And Carolyn, what you pointed out too was that it was a disproportionate number of Black people in your group, particularly Black women. And we have to think about us in terms of work historically, what that's meant for us in terms of Black people in this country, and how people have exploited us in terms of work. So it's a
Hmm.
long historical history. And so you also mentioned too, Carolyn, that there wasn't an understanding of why there was a need to talk about racism, because racism is a trauma, right? And so the trauma impacts us even in the workplace. And so that's what you were mentioning also. And so you had a lot of like resistance to even having the groups, but you were like, no, we need it. We're going to have it. So you advocated. So the part that you also mentioned was spirit drove you to do this, right? So
Hmm.
even when things got difficult for you, you still persevered, right? And so
100%.
that's kind of the title of our talk today. So can you share with the audience in terms of how is it even possible to experience healing and growth when you're in a toxic work environment? Because people might feel like that's not even possible. So can you share with that about
Yeah, great questions and insights. So go back, like it's into like 10 to 12 years. I worked at the same company, another location, and my manager I was already licensed in New York, so I came out here and I had a relicense, which wasn't pretty. And I did not want to go back through supervision because I graduated from Columbia. And I
that?
always tell people it took me 2 years to get over Columbia's racism. I mean,
Wow.
I had a really like detox of all the, microaggressions, or like not even what are you doing here, but just, different subtle things that happen. And also being indoctrinated with old school Ivy League, white kind of, superiority mentality, and the poor little Black people up in the Bronx. I mean, just a lot of stuff that, that's offensive. So,
Yeah.
so when I went to, work at this company, I had to get my license again, and I had a supervisor. I just immediately didn't like her. I was like, ooh, I just don't like her vibe. And then me and my coworker, who are Latin, she said to us, oh, you guys don't have to work hard for your license because you're both minorities. It's just going to pass you. Now, this is when,
What?
yeah. And this is when in California, you had to do the clinical verbal, that you had to do it out
What
loud.
exam?
Yes, yes. The clinical exam. I totally forgot it because by the time I had to do it, the oral, they changed it. But she was just saying, "Oh, they'll just look at you guys and pass it and just, minimize." And I was like, "Wow, this is
Wow.
horrible." And she also said to me, she was, "Wait a minute, I just want to ask you something. Why is your last name Coleridge?" She's like, "Well, why is your?" And then she's like, "I have another question. Like, why are so many Black people have the weirdest names? Why?" And I was like,
Wow.
okay. Then she wanted to be my supervisor. And I was
Oh
like,
my
no.
gosh.
I said, because I said, you're culturally insensitive. And I don't really feel
Mm,
comfortable. I was already licensed in another
mm,
state. So I was just
mhm,
doing this just to get the license. So it was just, it was very difficult. And then when I said that to her, she went around, told everyone I called her a racist. I said, culturally insensitive. I know.
how dare
And
you?
I know, right? Right. And then
Uh-huh.
she wrote me up and she created this whole scenario that I would not go to supervision. I wouldn't work with her and that I was being, belligerent, all these
Oh,
stereotypes. And I was like, where did this come from? And I didn't even know. I was straight out of New York. So New Yorkers were very direct.
yeah,
So she just said, I was too aggressive and all these other, stereotypes. But it was a blatant lie. And then
yeah.
everyone turned their back on me. One of the most painful things was one of the union rep who's representing was a Black woman, and she
Mhm.
actually supported the harassment. And I never knew why. Now, this is interesting how spirit works with you.
Oh,
I never knew why. And then years later, she was a social worker.
mm,
Another coworker said, "Oh, I know her. She had a daughter around your age who was a drug addict, and she was projecting all her results.
wow.
She has passed on now."
Mm,
Interestingly enough, and at the time, I just want to tell you the intensity of the harassment. I had had fibroids. I was bleeding.
mm,
I had a really bad. I was supposed to get surgery, and I didn't want to leave my job because I just moved there. It was all these different things. I ended a relationship, and it was I was bleeding like severely, and it was just really hard. But that same woman, I'm not
mhm.
saying it's karma, and not saying different. But she died of the same issue that I had.
What? Oh
Yes.
my gosh.
The way that's interesting is because you can't do evil. And there was no reason for this woman to this was the union rep, to kind of
Yeah,
make it look like that I was a problem because I was standing up. So,
right.
anyways, at the time I packed my office. I had a friend, a coworker, who was very sweet and very helpful.
Mhm.
And I heard this voice, and I didn't know why. Because by the way, I was maybe 36, and my scores were like, as a patient, patients will evaluate you, was a 94. And these are
Wow.
borderlines, these are depressive. I was only out 7 years, and I was always skilled as a therapist. And I'm like, why
Mhm.
is it, and 94? And I realized, oh, law, they think I'm going to have a lawsuit. And I wasn't even interested. I just didn't want to work with this woman.
Mm,
So
yeah.
so then this woman helped pack me up, and I heard, pack my stuff. I said, I just left. I just left without a job, and I prayed, and
Wow.
I ended up working. Yes, and I was sick, so I prayed to the universe, and I said, God, what do you want me to do? This is not
Yeah.
me. This is not who I am. My mother spent a lot of money for me to go to Columbia. I'm doing well. What is going on? And I heard this voice in my head. Why don't you work for me? And I
Hmm,
looked around and said, why don't you work for me? And
hmm.
I said, to my friend April, I said, I'm changing her name. And she's like, you're losing it. Like, they're not to hear her voice. But she was very, spiritual too. And the voice, I said, okay. And the voice in my head, and the voice said, the pay is good, the work is steady, and the retirement benefits are out of this world.
Wow.
So I was like, okay. And I learned about universal knowledge, universal awareness. I was very much into that. I read a lot of Susan Taylor from Essence, her stuff, and she's into, spirituality, science of mind back then. And I said, I'm just going to trust. And I left, and I started doing spiritual
Mm.
coaching on, and I got a job at another location.
Let me ask you a question real quick.
Yes.
So you left even though you had a job, right? They weren't saying you got to go, right?
Oh,
But you left because you knew that this was not the place for you, and you heard the voice of God telling you that there was
mhm,
something better for you. So you moved on. And so the importance, I think, there, or the takeaway is that it's important for us to really listen to
mhm,
what the voice is telling us. So then you moved on, and then what
mhm.
happened?
I did move on, and actually I had to leave because the other supervisor was even more racist than her.
Oh my God.
Said to me, what did she say? She goes, if you stay, she goes, you always complain about these black things, black things, black things. Like, what is it up with all these black issues? And she goes, if you don't want to work with this other boss, you're gonna have to work with me. Both of them got kicked out, by the way, years later. The karma came back to them. So I ended up saying, I just prayed, and I went to another location, and this older woman, this older Jewish woman said, like, I was blackballed. Every other location would not hire me. It was weird. And I'm like, am I that powerful? Like, what is going on here? It was really
Mhm.
crazy.
Mhm.
So this other woman, she said, I said, well, there's this. She goes, I heard about, I don't care. I don't believe it. She didn't know me. She hired me on call and got into medical social work. And then that's when I started to do more spiritual work and healing and stuff. And then, interestingly enough, this is how the universe will set you up. 6 months later, she ended
Mhm.
up getting fired. So it was like she was identifying with me, and spirit
Wow.
set me up. I worked on call. My mother helped pay off my $600 loans to Columbia. This is a vulnerable time. I was ill. I didn't get certain. All these different things happened. It's all in my book. But what's interesting is that years forward, I tell
Mhm.
people this story and then I got hired at UCLA as an energy healer. When I just started doing healing, I got
Mhm.
hired and I ended
Mhm.
up on CNN. What do I'm saying? When you really trust God, God has a higher purpose, a
Yeah.
universal
So God
purpose.
elevated you higher.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Even when people are trying to blackball you. So, it's interesting too, is that people sometimes think, oh, that's not true. People wouldn't do that. But that's a real thing. People do blackball you in certain employment situations and you feel stuck, right? But you kept moving. You kept moving.
And it
Like no.
wasn't easy. I was really ill. I was anemic because I was all the
Mhm.
blood, and I
Mhm.
was, kind of nervous. Thank God I had backup. My mother
Yeah.
said, I'll help pay like half of the loans. And then I started doing, I didn't have my license still. And then whatever she did, it ruined it. So I had to do more hours. And I had a reserve
Wow.
license in New York. And I was so enraged for years.
Wow.
And then I finally realized that this was a setup by the universe. And I asked God, I said, do I need to sue this people? And I heard very clearly,
Mm.
no. And I was like, no. And I'm like, I wonder why. So years forward, when I'm doing the work
Mhm.
stress group, I tell them the story.
Mhm.
And again, my life changed. My practice built up. I was doing spiritual life coaching because I used to do coaching on Wall Street as an executive coach. I worked as an EAP, employee assistance professional. So
Mhm.
everything that goes through your life comes together in the end. There is spiritual redirections
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
even with harassment.
Yeah. So I'm
Mhm.
wondering, Carolyn, so you talked a lot about your own journey, right? What would you say if you had a client and she was experiencing a toxic work environment? How would you help her deal or heal or grow in that moment? What would you
Yeah.
do?
Well, it's like some of the situations very validate, listen, hear, understand, empathize, all the traditional stuff that goes through and, say, what is your highest calling? And this is what's interesting about Black women, because most of the people in my groups were Black women. And I was shocked. I learned this on the job. I would say, if you had $5 million, what would you really do? I know this is horrible. We all hear you. We're all in the same boat. We all the same
Mhm.
gender and race.
Mhm.
And like this one woman, for example, I'm changing the story, but
Uh-huh.
she gave me permission to write the story. I'm going to write it in my other book
Uh-huh.
called False Security. So she
Hmm.
was so secure in this job that, paid well, but she didn't really
Mhm.
like it. And
Hmm.
I said, well, what do you really want to do? And she said, I don't know. And I said, if you could do something, what could you do? And she said, what's strange? I go, where to get the most joy? She goes, as a security guard, all these kids, she was a gangbanger, all these kids come up to me and I tell them, don't do this. I just teach them when I see them in the hallways. I see them try to leave school. I see them do this.
Mhm.
And she said, and I've changed their lives, and they've come back to me,
Wow.
and make up a name, Miss Williams, you've changed my life. And I said, well, how many women do you think you've helped like that? Or she was females and males. She said about, I don't know. She said 20. I said 20 different
Wow.
kids. I said, that's a job.
That's
And I was
awesome.
and then what was interesting too is that
Yeah.
she was young, she was in her 30s, she was in good
Mhm.
health, she was thin, and she was healthy. And this is important because she had almost had a heart attack in the job she was in because they were harassing her really
Oh my
badly.
God. So that's a classic example, right? How
Yes.
that external stress can really kill us.
And she was
Really.
being studied by the hospital, like
Wow.
Cedars-Sinai, because she had no high blood pressure, no
Oh my
pre-existing stuff.
gosh.
It was the harassment was really bad. I remember all the stories, but it
Mm.
was severe, and she had 3 kids, and it was just horrible.
Mm.
And I said, "Maybe you're supposed to be doing work with adolescents." She goes, "I don't have a degree in all of this." I said, "I don't know. That you changed 30 kids' lives?" She goes, "Maybe more."
Wow.
And so I called the story, "That's false security." She was a security guard.
Yes.
And then 2 years later,
Uh-huh.
she knocks on my window at the job. She said, "I left. The school hired me back, after school program, no degree, and I'm talking to the kids."
Oh, awesome.
Like, it's
Awesome.
kinda like Miss Williams' Corner.
Yeah, it's kind of like sometimes we have situations that are like a wake-up call to us, right? So it could
Yes,
be a
yes.
physical illness, it could be mentally, we feel like this is just like killing me, right? Or it's draining my spirit, my soul. So sometimes we have those moments, but you're also saying that you're sharing a story because we know that stories and testimonies are so healing. And so you're sharing your story, you're sharing your story of another client in terms of showing that healing is possible. So I'm wondering, Carolyn, when you think about the clients that you work with. And you talked about, you support their healing by validating, right? By helping them to really identify their true gifts and talents. And
Mhm.
what are some other things that maybe you do to help support their healing and their growth as well?
I have them, sometimes create vision boards, if they want to. I have them do the pros and cons lists.
Mhm.
And that when I say this, this is an interview, so it's really small. This takes time. This is over
Yeah,
groups, like 8-week session groups. And
yeah,
did you do, kind of what did you do today? Did you and
right.
I tell them to ask. I said, so many of the people who have the worst harassment are connected to God and
Mm,
connected to the universe. And I
mm,
realized that why is it so many Black women? And I said, oh my God, we are creators,
mm,
creating life, and we're
mhm,
teachers. You have to teach. And I said, I always say, do you want to sue? Oh yeah, I'm going to sue. This is blah, blah, blah. You're a teacher. We came in as
mm,
teachers. And then I said, well, what do you want to create after that? I'm not
mhm.
sure. I just need to go to the lawsuit. And many of them
Yeah,
have and won. And then creators. So we
yeah.
have this double whammy. And there might be in other groups. I'm just talking about Black women right now. I've seen it,
Mhm,
I mean, thousands, I mean, hundreds of times, where, empower them. And I said, it's your choice. And then with
mhm,
the meditation, it was a mindfulness class, some of it. I was like, let's go within and get your own spiritual truth. What is
mm,
your inner, voice? But what's
mm.
interesting is that when years ago, when I asked God, should I sue? No. And I'm like, because I wouldn't have been there at this time to help all those women later.
Oh, isn't that something? It was a
Yeah.
purpose in it. It was a purpose
Yeah.
in it.
And
Yeah.
there is a lot of, support groups. I had 3 Black groups for Black women. I mean, ended up the mindfulness group. I had one on the weekend that ended up mostly Black people would come. And then I had a Black women's group. I did one anyways, even though the women said we shouldn't have one. And so that really was a supportive, that they heard each other. We would support each other, and we would meditate. Every group would meditate because they would get their own answers.
Yes.
I would say, why don't you go to yoga? What about a sound bath? I have my little gong.
Uh,
And I said, they're like, well, I'm Christian. This is not, I said, I'm Christian too,
mhm.
but
Mhm.
this called me. But if it doesn't feel comfortable, find your own truth. And they would just
Yeah.
branch out like trees and do whatever they needed to do. There was
Yeah.
a great place in LA called the Green Tree or the Tree, and they had Black women support groups and meditation.
Mhm.
I would find the right support because we need community to heal.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
community and healing, but also you really
Yes.
supported them in number one, slowing down and pausing, because as Black people, as Black women, we are going, right? We're handling we're juggling all these different things, and you're given permission to pause, right? You're given permission to really look within and really listen to what you are hearing for yourself, what you know works for yourself. And it's very different from what you were saying. The people were talking earlier about making it more of like an individualized problem. Like you're in here because of work stress, because you don't know how to deal with stress. No, you're here because you're in an environment that's racist and sexist, right? That is designed to oppress you. And so you provided a different way for them to share their story, which I think was very healing. And you really advocated for them, Carolyn, because if you weren't there, they would have kept doing the same things. People probably wouldn't be coming to the groups. They'd drop out of the groups, all these different things. And you talked about something, Carolyn, in relation to you feel like there's a higher meaning in terms of why Black women are experiencing that. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I really feel that I think there's a reason why, and it's just my observation. I could be wrong, but if you watch TV, there's always Black women are not there. They always have Black men always have other partners. They're always negating us. We're marginalized so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've seen that within other groups or communities, and just using my intuition, I said we must be very powerful.
Mm.
And when you work in social services, when you work with people that, and I've learned this many different ways in working with people, some of the most powerful souls have the hardest lives. I've seen it over
Mm.
and over again.
Mm.
And also the people that are most marginalized or oppressed, they're not like lower or belief. And I get that from my parents who had a lot of pride. My father was a social worker, my mother was a teacher, my father, they all used spirit. And my mother had 3 scholarship funds. My father had a fund for kids, at-risk kids, that, that there's this power within us that is so undeniable of spirit and
Yeah.
truth. And, we forget, look at the words, human, man with hue. We're the original people.
Yeah.
We are the original teachers. And so many women I worked with privately that worked in the industry that were doing promotions, they were marginalized when they said we want a diversity person, but they would use other people and they have to do things with movies. And a lot of the industry stuff, a lot of the information out there is about Black people. Our words are everywhere. Let's put our hands together. Back in the day, listen to the music that we're all over media. But
Yeah.
then these women working the groups are like, they would not even let them do it. And they're like, why? And I'm like,
Wow.
because we're the original voices. So
Mm.
we have that extra burden or, you know, um, connection to the divine to teach others through
Mm-hmm.
our words, through our
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
Universe versus a song.
Yeah.
Oh, Black people are so into music because we hear the rhythm of the universe
Mm.
through our bodies and minds. So when you go back, everything's going back to center.
Mm.
So we have to teach. Martin Luther King said that we are teachers. And what I also think about what's great about mindfulness is that Martin Luther King's passive resistance, that was a mindfulness technique.
Mm.
So when people were like in the class, like, oh, I'm Christian, I was like, Martin Luther King did a lot with this mindfulness, the same thing. It
Yeah.
all comes back. As the
Yes.
spirit led me, it all comes back. Did I answer your question? Because sometimes I can go off
No,
the
you
tangent.
did, because what's interesting is that you really addressed too a common barrier that we might hear for Black women, right? So in terms of not wanting to connect to, this side of us because we might have a certain religious belief, but really emphasizing that there's nothing in religion that doesn't say you shouldn't have a personal connection to God. And that's what you were talking about. That's how you're supporting that. And so
Yes.
I'm wondering too, when you talked about, Black people, we have this connection, right? In terms of that higher level of that higher vibration, right? So when we go through these challenging experiences, you feel like, or you're saying that it's a way for us to push us to kind of teach or to be
Mhm.
the innovators and to kind of make
Mhm.
things different because we are the ones to do that.
Yes, absolutely. And, a lot of oppressed groups have that, but I'm focusing on Black women tonight because I had so many in the group. And this is that one example of false security, just one story of many. Another woman harassed. And I said, what else would you want to do? And I said, oh, you have $5 million. She said, that's not enough. I said, 10. She was, okay. I would, I said, we're in LA. So she said, I would help foster kids. I was in foster care. Another one,
Hmm.
I want to open up, there's this one woman and she said she was really good with girls that were, at risk. She had 4 girls herself, and she'd work at these youth environments, and the most wretched girls would listen to her. And I said,
Hmm.
"You have a gift." And she's like, "Well, I have 4 girls." I said, "No." She says, "Well, yeah, the other women don't have it as easy." I said, "That's your gift." I said, "You have to open up a house." I call her name Sparrow. It's like Sparrow's house. You got to call your name, you got to open up a house. And she said, that is so crazy. I keep having a dream I should open up a house.
Wow.
And I said, that's spirit, that's what that's why. And she was, her mom wasn't around and the whole story that they went through, but then she was able to transform. So that's what you do.
Yeah.
It's like a spiral. You go
Yeah.
through something and then you give back and teach to others. That's the true high spiritual path. You're a
Yes.
seeker, you're a learner, you're a creator, and then you're a teacher, and then you become a master. So right now, when
Mm.
you do this podcast and you're doing all this other stuff, you're becoming a master in your field because you've overcome the hurdles of what you've, been through, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I would say like I'm still jumping the hurdles, right? Because, at the beginning it was like this sense of like overwhelm, like what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And
Mm,
God put it in my spirit to start talking about it, right? To share my story. And so the more I shared my story, the more healing it became for me. And then other Black women start reaching out to me and saying, thank you for sharing the story. Were you reading my mind? Like I'm going through this too. And I just
mhm,
want to be very clear for all of us that we go through these things, but it's important for us not to keep it inside. It's important for us not to feel ashamed that we're going through these things. And it's important for us to really be able to kind of sort out what's going on so we don't internalize it in terms of something's wrong with us, or we don't start
mhm.
feeling like, oh, bad things always happen to me. I'm a victim. We are victors, the fact that we keep getting up and keep doing what we need to do, right? So, Carolyn, I'm wondering too if, with Black clients and Black women clients, and you talked also about Black women in the social sciences, right? And you
Mhm.
also talked about your own experiences of being in a toxic work environment in a healthcare environment where it's supposed to be promoting mental health. So, can you speak a little bit specifically to the Black women in the social services field who
Mhm.
are tasked to help people, right? Or
Mhm.
who are tasked to do trauma informed care, but they're being traumatized by those same systems. Can you speak a little bit in terms of how to support their healing and growth?
Yeah, so I think that they're change makers from the inside out.
Mm,
I am in the spiritual community very strongly as an energy healer. I ended up on CNN, and people would say, other healers would say, "Why are you at that company? They're so toxic." And I'm like,
mhm.
"Well, where does the light need to go? To the darkness." So
Oh,
sometimes yeah, that's the light will shine the
oh,
bright. So it's
yes.
and then you realize that it wasn't like something I wanted to do. It was an assignment. It was a job, and with everything with that job, like at one point at that job, they didn't even give me an office. And this little like Becky, or comes up, this Republican girl, and she's like, "How come you don't have an office? You've been here so long." And I was just like, when she says it, I had to share other people's office because I was part time,
Mm,
and it was just crazy. It was just ridiculous.
mm.
You don't want my space here. And I actually said to my manager, and I said, "Is there no room at the inn?" And she just looked at me. I got an office 2 days later because
Isn't that
I thought of
crazy?
the Christ teaching of how that he went from place to place, and like the family, he was a pregnant mother, whatever. And it was just, and she got like chills or something, and she got me an office because she knew this was harassment. I was trying to bring the light there.
Wow. I
75%
love
of the
that.
yeah,
I
75% of
love
the
that.
patients were Black. What kind of craziness is
Yes.
that?
So
Yeah.
we're
Yes.
there to shine the light in darkness. I want us to all remember that. That was beautiful, right?
Yeah.
So and
Yes.
I want to read some comments in the chat, and then I wanted to ask you some questions, some more
Sure.
questions. So people are saying thank you for talking about spiritual redirections. God always has a setup if we are willing to accept it and move. Meditation saved my life.
Mm,
I resonate with this so much. I recently had an interview where Karen went off on me.
mm,
Wow, that's crazy. I declined the offer they were about to give. It would have been toxic. Thank you so much for rejecting that offer, right? It's like,
mm,
as Dr. Maya Angelou says, when people show you who they are the first time, believe it, right? So I'm glad
mhm.
you did not take that offer. That is ridiculous. And, thank you to her that she showed her true colors during the interview, right?
Yes.
And then it
Mm,
says, someone says, where does the light need to go? So that was good. And it said, Black women tend to sacrifice themselves to be someone else's light. Ooh, can you comment on that?
yeah, that's a good thing to say. And I hate to use the old biblical thing that God doesn't give us as much as we can do. But
Mm,
I think and then I became an energy healer because I had fibroids and they were really bad. And I didn't, I was concerned about the surgery at the time and losing my, uterus. And as an energy healer, as a Reiki master, doing hands-on healing, I went to a Black church, Agape. We all were healers there. There are many, many Black healers there. I learned how to take care of ourselves. You know, what can you do? So that is really, we're stretched thin.
Yeah.
So I was, you know, people come to meditate. That's all you do. Turn off your cell phones, taking
Mm,
care of your setting boundaries, you know, typical social work stuff, setting boundaries, you know, doing self-healing on myself, eating healthy, you know,
yeah.
going to, you know, different types of groups. We have to
Yeah.
do that. Saying no, like this other woman said, you know, no, it's not, the money's not worth it, you
Yeah.
know. And when it comes to health, and I said this over and over and over to Black women, when that woman, you know, I'll call her false security, was talking about she had a heart attack and she was healthy and young and thin. I said, that's
Yeah.
not right. And I
Yeah.
said, it's never, your health is never worth it.
Yeah.
It's never
Yeah.
worth a job when you give up
Yeah.
your health or your soul. So that
Yeah.
was a big thing that came up over and over again. I said, red flags. If you're starting to affect your health, then this
Mm,
is not right for you. That is a red flag. There's so many red flags: your health, your spirit, your
mm,
finances, you know, because
mhm.
the universe, God will take care of you. I made more
Yeah.
money, you know, when I left, I went on call for a while there, more money came in because I had the time of creativity and to
Mm,
listen and to be
yes.
part of it. But we have
Yes.
to take care of ourselves, yes, and be that light. So that's why I gave space to Black women in that
Yeah.
clinic to speak. And I said, you
Yeah.
guys have to support one another. None of this pettiness or this and that and
Yeah.
all the different issues that I said, that's not going to be in here. We're going to
Yeah.
support each other. I don't care where you come
Good.
from or what you look like. We're all going to support each
Yes.
other because the
Yes.
system does it so well. Why are we
Yes.
contributing to it? Okay.
Exactly. And why do we keep falling to the same traps of the divide and conquer, right? So you talked about the other lady, the union person, that whole
Oh,
thing of like, all skin folk and kinfolk, right? So she didn't have your side, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because that happens a lot, to us sometimes in these work environments where we see another Black woman and we want to align with her, we believe
mhm,
we can that familiarity and they end up
mhm,
hurting us. But I do want to
mhm,
circle back to something too in terms of, what I think the message that we're both saying is that we don't expect anyone to sacrifice themselves, right? What
no.
we're saying is that, yes, we can use those experiences and channel that to bring light, right? So, I always say like the truth will come out, right? So the truth will come to light. So that's the light, right? But not
Mhm,
to sacrifice our own well-being, not to sacrifice our own mental and our physical well-being. That is not what we're saying, right? We don't want anyone to sacrifice themselves
no.
and to know what are the signs that that is happening, right? And so
Mhm,
you talked about that woman who had a heart attack. I hope to God that most of us don't get to that stage before we
mhm,
recognize that. But I know for me, I started getting to the point where, I mentioned this before, I started having physical symptoms. Like I started having
mm,
profuse nosebleeds. I'd never
mm,
had a nosebleed before in my life, but profuse
mm,
nosebleeds. My hair started falling out, right? I started
mm,
feeling a sense of dread that I did not want to go to work. I kept feeling like, oh my God, this job is turning me into something I'm not. And then the other thing was I started questioning my profession. Like, did I
mm,
want to be a psychologist? Right. So I think it's important for all of us to be aware of what are those physical, mental, spiritual signs that it's time to go. We can shine a light for a certain amount of time, but we never want anybody to kind of stay somewhere and sacrifice themselves. I don't want anybody to really get that sense. And then the conversation about all skin folk and kinfolk. Carolyn, can you talk about what that is like in the job and how to heal and grow from that? Because to me, that has been the most painful, right?
mm.
The other Black women who have not been supportive of us, or other Black women who may have betrayed me or us in certain situations. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I want to go back to the light a little bit too, because I used to
Uh-huh.
write this on the board. And then also some of the symptoms that you're saying, I'm just elaborating the same thing you're saying. I said headaches, stomach aches, this, and I would talk about the chakras. As a healer, I realized
Mm,
why this was so important because the healers have to
yeah.
take time to meditate and take care of themselves. Because I thought I was always this weird Black woman doing energy healing. And then, knowing that the nose actually has to do with like in a spiritual smelling the truth,
Mm,
and the blood represents the soul. Hmm.
wow.
Yes, like the soul's coming out. Like the truth is so like it's, you know, your cat, your dog, they sniff. because they can
Yeah.
smell truth. So
Yeah.
it's like it's being trying to be blocked. I used to get vertigo, and that was like they were trying to
Oh,
mess with my crown chakra, the download from the divine. But speaking of the
wow.
download from the divine, sometimes it's scary to lose. And I'll go back to kin folks and black, is that when I said light is knowledge. So you think of a
Mm,
light bulb, that's knowledge. So when you shine the light in a situation, you also will get information. If you're
mm,
quiet, you'll get those inspirations from the divine. You'll get a book or
yeah.
a podcast or
Yeah.
speaking or
Yeah.
whatever. It was coming. People were asking me right and left. The minute I had time not to be, mind controlled by the company I was in, I worked on call, I could truly hear the divine. And think about when you think of finances, I have kids, I have this and that, money source, God source, income source. Once I said I work for God, everything came through, paying
Wow.
the loans and this. And then in terms of, I work with a lot of people that are like, well, this and that is better, or they have it easier. And I said, do not, feed into white supremacy. It's like, in terms
Mm,
of like, when you take, are not respecting me. I had a woman I worked with, and she wouldn't talk to me and this and all this stuff. And there was only like 3 of us there. I'm like, what is the problem? What are you doing?
mhm,
And
mhm,
and then she's just like, well, I want to, get along and da, da, da. And I'm just like, okay, I grew up, I went to Columbia, I went to Wesleyan, I grew up in suburbs. And I said, whenever I saw a black person, I would run and hug them because there were no black people there. I mean, my father had a black church in a black neighborhood. And then again,
uh-huh,
that helped me too. The church, I grew up in the church, but then I did spiritual
mhm,
healing. But I was just like, you don't know what this is not, just because you have a degree, they're not going to like you so much. Not saying everyone, but I
mhm,
was just like, and then she came back years later and said, I'm so sorry, you were so right. Yeah, I got the t-shirt.
wow.
Like, yeah. So I think it's because that we've, like internalized self-hatred, internalized
Mhm,
racism.
yeah.
Like, what is that about? Like, the world does it for us so well. Why are we
Yeah.
doing it to each other? We are
Yeah.
beautiful, powerful, the
Yeah.
first people. Susan Taylor
Yeah.
said this in lesson, the first people God created.
Yeah.
And if we weren't that powerful and that dynamic, why in the world would so many people go and steal so much from Africa?
Yes.
We have
And
to know.
be so intentional when trying to destroy us, right? And also, Carolyn, when we think about the internalized oppression, but also that sense of competitiveness, right? So
Mm,
we're taught, and this is very disturbing that we're often taught to not trust another woman or not to trust another Black woman, right? And so we might be seeing another Black woman like, oh, good, like I'm so glad to connect to her. But she might be seeing you as a threat, as competition, sizing you up, like all these other things that really kind of throws us off. And again, it's very, very, very painful. So in the chat, I see this is very painful, especially when they listen to
no.
other people, especially when it's another person of color. Our struggles are not all the same. There's a common thread. Somebody saying, literally experiencing this right now.
Oh,
So for those of
wow.
us who
Mm.
have experienced or are experiencing currently, as you see in the chat, currently experiencing a situation where we're in a toxic work environment and there's another Black woman or other Black women who are not supportive and who are contributing to that toxicity. What words can you give to people who are experiencing that?
Yeah. Ooh. Well, my mom said, pray. Every time I went through something difficult, it sounds like really trite. I ask the universe. Like, I had a manager, this is recently, that wanted to take me to HR because it was a long story. My father had COVID, he survived, and she was just like trying to write up everyone. 20 people left. And in my book, I wrote about it. I said, HR is the higher realms. I'm going to
Mm.
God. I'm going to heaven.
Ooh,
Yep.
yes,
I'm saying,
yes.
why is it? I said, you sent me here. What's going on? It's
Yeah,
like an appointment by you. I think God
yeah.
appoints us. And then, things started shifting. And then, like, that woman came back to me and apologized. And sometimes you
Mhm.
have to just, pray for them. Sometimes you pray, like that woman who was really mean to me years ago. How
Yeah.
ironic. It was like 10, 12 years later that another social worker came to me and said she died of uterine cancer. The same, I didn't have
Wow.
uterine cancer, but I had kind of fibroids. But that
Mhm.
was kind of interesting because it was so mean.
Very.
Even the racist manager was like, she said to me, she goes, what is it with Black people? They don't support each other. She said that.
What?
Yes, because
Oh
the,
my
the,
God.
the union rep was so mean to me.
Oh my
So
gosh.
you just have to step up because the truth will always come to light. You can
Yes.
pray for them. You get your
Yes.
allies on the outside. That's
Yes.
why I created this group at, those
Yes.
groups at that, place. So these women
Mhm.
had it. And guess what? That group I created, they still keep in touch. They'll send me pictures.
Awesome.
They're still
That's
together. They
great.
still
They
support
built
each
a
other.
community sisterhood.
Yeah, yeah. And I was the therapist. I was a little sad that I couldn't be part of their little group. But no, but they'll send me pictures like we all got together. We think of you. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, it's beautiful. And,
Yes.
and also, if I could grab something real quick in terms of a God, I had a client who was, I just happened to have this. She created this vision board for me because she said that she got a message from God that I should leave this company. Yeah. Okay. And she said, these are all the people you're get. She sat down. This woman was schizophrenic.
Wow.
She really wasn't. They misdiagnosed her.
Uh,
And she ended up and just created this. She said, take a leap of faith.
wow. Your clients.
Yes.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I just found this. And then she's like, you're gonna help so many people. And she said, came up sad. She goes, I had a dream, you're gonna leave. And I said, I'm not leaving. It was 2 years later I left. But I feel like, but she's always the one that sends pictures and said, we all got together. We still remember you. So, and every time I say, should I have done that?
Hmm.
But should I have done that? All of the blue, somebody will call me out of the blue. I'm across the country now. I'm not in California anymore. And they'll say, oh, I just thought of you and how you told us to meditate, or you taught about the light. And
Hmm.
so you have to just really align yourself with
Yeah.
people that support you. Because
Yeah.
sometimes, like one of my supervisors, when I was really being harassed, she was Mexican, and she, and some of them did support me. She gave me the higher managers and the higher union rep's name, and she said, why are they making you do this? She goes, you're being harassed. Here is this number. And she goes, I'll stay out of it, but this is wrong. So you never know
Mm.
who's alive. Yeah, never know who's. And you know
Yeah.
what's interesting? Years
Mm.
later, I ended up working with her at another location, and she said, "My God, you were treated so badly. Like we were all talking." And then you know what? She was kicked
Mm.
out by the same manager, and so was her friend.
Wow.
Yep, the same
Isn't that
manager that
something?
I took the hit first.
Right.
And then she said to me, because they thought I was like this, overzealous black person, from New York. And she said, you were right. And I said, yeah. She goes, no. She looked at me in the eye. She says, you were right. We were wrong. You were right.
Oh,
Two of them, older women, they got kicked out and they left. So
wow.
it
Isn't
things
that
when you do
something?
what's right. So these women that are not right or supporting you, so painful.
Yeah.
Don't even invest in them. Step
Yes.
away.
Yes.
Pray for them, because it's gonna.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's not like being petty. It's universal law. It will come back to them.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think it's important too to recognize that it will come back to them, but we need to step away from them, right? We need to protect ourselves from them, no longer tell them your business, right? Just keep it very cordial, right? So that's the one thing.
Mhm.
Something else that I did like a purge of my cell phone. So all the numbers in my cell phone where there were toxic people or toxic associations, deleted, right? So I don't even see their names. So, what can we do to protect ourselves from these people, even if they are other Black women, because they're showing you they're not invested in your well being? So, you have to set a boundary, right? And it's okay to do that. It is painful, but it's important for us to do that. I want to read a few more comments. It's been 6 months and I still have anxiety attacks when thinking about going back to work.
So
Ooh, I
when I
feel
saw
you.
that, meditate. Anxiety sometimes is your spirit trying to talk to you. So it's
Hmm.
trying to say like that energy, trying to get, going, get your own support, counseling, but maybe again, there's a higher calling that,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
because that's not good. That's going to make you sicker and sicker. You know?
Exactly. And I think sometimes things happen in such a way to push us out, right? I know for me, like I've known for years I needed to leave, right? But I was like,
Mm,
no, I'm staying for the kids. No, I'm doing this, right? But it became so miserable. It was no way for me to go back, right? And so I think it's important when we start having like anxiety attacks, that dread of going back to work. That is a sign, right? And I see someone else said, wow, this is my life. I recently left my toxic workplace. Unfortunately, I'm in the healthcare field. So unfortunate that so many toxic managers in this field. Absolutely. Started my
mm.
own therapy group practice and vowed not to be anything like the old managers. Yes. And I love it. I love it. I feel like we have similar stories. I'm finally taking a leap into full-time DEI consulting. Oh, interesting. How do you deal with your presence triggering people?
Oh, wow. That is, ooh. And that's interesting because when you shine the light, think of it, if people are in the dark and they're shady, the light is very threatening. And
Yes.
this is why I got, I started getting, that vertigo and I feel like they're messing with my crown, all these different things. It could be isolative. It could be
Mhm.
hard. And that's why I had the group for, women, supporting them. I had my other groups on the outside, my own support, healing, but a regular dialogue. Every time something went wrong, I would say, it was a hard journey. This was a task. I knew when I went there, I was called there. I knew it was a calling, and
Mhm.
to help, and by the time I left, there were like 7 more Black therapists there.
Wow.
I know. Well, it wasn't me. They hated me. I mean, not the therapist, but the company. Because once you become, I had so many microaggressions. When you become that voice, the light, that's the difficulty. But that isolation can help you, unfortunately or fortunately, listen to the divine stronger.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you do have to get your backup. You got to get your support.
Yeah.
And then, but when hearing, like, a lot of people in the chat are saying, like, this is my life. This is so,
Mhm.
and I don't know, majority of them are Black women. So that's why I saw it was like, you guys, this is a theme.
Yeah.
We are creators, and this is a time to create. We're in the Aquarian age. You're supposed to be creating new jobs, new businesses, new different things. Your health
Mhm.
is not worth it. You don't want to die over a job. It's not worth it.
Ooh,
There is always
not
something
even.
else to do.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think it's important too, in relation to that question about how do you deal with your presence being triggering. I think if you recognize that people are being triggered by you or intimidated by you, that is a sign that that's not the space for you, right? Because if people are so intimidated by what you bring to the table, then how are they going to really support your growth? They're not, right? Because your growth, your talents, your intellect is making them feel insecure because they're an insecure person, right? So to me, that's a sign that that's not a good space for you, right? I'm not saying like leave tomorrow, but what I'm saying is just be aware of when people are being triggered by you, that's a really intense feeling that somebody has just because of your presence, right? So that's something with them. Okay. I see someone else said, I literally just left Bible study, discuss feelings like the fear of leaving, not knowing what's next, the harm, etc. I shared. I don't know what to do, and I'm sure if it's God. I randomly came to LinkedIn and this is my feed. Awesome. Okay. I don't think I've joined lives and I'm not on LinkedIn all the time, but I clicked it. I'm in awe at the confirmation that it just happened. I'm in awe too, right?
It's a
So this is
synchronicity.
right? This came because it was aligned with what you needed to hear. And so
Mhm.
my hope is that you're able to hear this conversation. And even if you didn't hear the whole conversation, you can go back and look at it on YouTube. But you're able to recognize that many of us have a fear of leaving, right? And I just want to put that out there that it's not like most people are like, I'm done with this job, la, 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 la. There's a lot of fear involved. But I think it's important because Carolyn, you talked about looking at the pros and cons. We have to look at the pros and cons and staying in these jobs and think about is my physical health, is my sanity, right? Is my spiritual well being, is this all worth it for this, right? And hopefully we say no and we start planning for other options. And again, the planning process takes a long time. I know for me, it took like 2 years before I was ready to leave. But getting in the space of saying, what is it that I want for my life? Is this the life that I want for myself? I think after the pandemic, many of us have started thinking that like, this is not the life that I wanted, right? This is not what I worked so hard for. And so I also want to mention that I'll put on the YouTube channel the description section a discussion I had with one of my friends about all skin folk and kinfolk, right? So we had a longer conversation about that. So I'm wondering, Carolyn, I'm going to ask you some kind of questions and see how you would address this, right? What would
Mhm.
you say to a Black woman who said, similar to what we've seen in the chat, who said, you know what, I really hate this job. This job is killing me. But I can't leave because the benefits are good.
Yeah.
I need the health
So
insurance. What would you say?
I would look, at their health and other things. But I always say in these groups I did, harassment is usually harassment by the universe to do your higher calling. And if I wouldn't have said that if I didn't see so many. I mean, I would have 35 people in a group per week for 7 years. Same stories. Everyone had
Wow.
another calling that was severely harassed. There was something
Wow.
else. Now, some of them may have been to do the lawsuit. Oh, my husband's a lawyer. Maybe I'm going to do this to teach. And some of them
Hmm.
wanted to create something else, but they're too frightened. I mean, maybe that's part of my purpose, but it is there's always, you're harassed by the universe. You're being called, you're being, anointed to a higher calling. Okay.
Wow.
Your calling is conscious creation with the universe. A is anointed appointment. Okay. L, it's a long time longing. All right. It's a lucrative, it's lifetime, it's a lifetime longing, and it's usually lucrative, like lifestyle. Okay. LLI, it's intuitive and intentional. N, it's just in my new book coming out. It's non-negotiable. When you get a calling from the divine, it's non-negotiable. Okay. And G, it's God's gift to you. So a
Yes.
calling is something that we need to do. And I believe that anyone can have it. But I
Yeah.
think Black women have this ability to create, we're on a feminine earth. Think about it. It's time for creativity, so
Yeah.
on earth, this is like, we're going back to the divine feminist coming back.
Yeah.
We're being creators is part of it. So
Yeah.
I would say it is scary, and it does
Yeah.
take, you have to do planning. It's like a table. You have to get your economics. You got to get your together, your connection to the divine. Start paying off those credit cards,
Mm.
start asking, getting that link in to God, start to do a vision board, start asking for SMS signs, messages, and synchronicity from the universe that will
Mm.
lead you on your path. You'll meet somebody
Yeah.
and say, I'm looking for a speaker. What? I was just thinking of being a speaker. I just, when I was trying to be a healer, I was like,
Uh-huh.
it was on the side, and I bumped into somebody at a healing workshop that said, oh, they're looking for a healer at UCLA. I'm like, what? Say what? How did that happen? I just left my job. And I was like, who's listening to me? But I made that request. I answered the call.
Yes. Yes. People love that. Harassment is harassment by the universe for a higher calling, right? So we're being pushed to a higher level. So what would you say to a Black woman? And I'm saying this because I've experienced this for myself, and I've had clients who say this. I'm not leaving this job because they're not going to push me out of here, right? I've invested too much into this. I'm not leaving. I'm going to fight them. What would you say to a Black woman who said that?
Are you ready to fight? Do you have, the energy to do, a lawsuit or this? Is that what you're thinking of? I would work with them and see if that's what they really want to do. And
Mm,
maybe they do need to be there to be the light. And I've had many people, do their own lawsuits and won, or not. Sometimes that's part of it. But I was like, how's your health? Are you
mm,
sleeping? Are you ready
mm.
for a fight? Because once this is a team environment. And once you get out of the team, out of their line, they're going to put you back in place. So I said,
Yes.
be prepared. It's going to be nasty.
Yeah.
It's going to
Oh,
be
yeah.
difficult. It's going to be hard. Are you
Yeah.
ready? Do you have your
Yeah.
support? Do you
Yeah.
have this and that? Because it is something to do, but it's not easy. And I
Yeah.
tell them, go call a whole bunch of lawyers or,
Yeah.
but again, it's like, what's your health doing? What's this? And then if I say, there's something else you should be doing. Oh yeah, I want to do this. I'm like, do both, you
Yes.
know?
And the thing is that you're spending so much energy fighting people who are not worth the time. More than likely, nothing's really going to change, right? Because the system protects one another. And we see this a lot with bullies in the workplace. They all collude with one another. They
Oh
support one
yeah.
another. And, you're like, how do these people stay here? Because they all collude with each other. But the thing is that we're spending all this energy fighting when we could be using this energy for something else, right? That energy to go to that higher level, right? Or that energy that we could have in terms of tapping into our creativity. And so we're kind of wasting that in many ways, right? Okay, last question. What if somebody says, and
Mhm.
I've heard this too, um, I don't want to leave because all jobs are like this. All jobs have, devils in it. And, I'd rather stay with the devil I know than the devil that I don't know.
Yeah, and again, it depends on where they are and like how bad they've been beaten up by the system. And, again, is it worth it? And sometimes they say, well, my husband's going to leave me or this is going to happen. And I was just like, is this really worth it? A job is a job, but your
Yeah.
purpose is something so much different. Your
Yes.
purpose is your higher calling,
Yes.
and a job like, I think we had it in the work stress group. You are not your job. It's
Mm.
something you do. It's not who you are. You're a soul. You're
Yes.
a spirit. You're a
Mm-hmm.
creator. What do you
Yeah.
want to create?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, using some cognitive behavioral, you think that every place is like that. And using universal wisdom, the law of attraction, guess what? You're going to recreate it.
Hmm.
So you got to be really careful about, thoughts do go out to the universe and come back. They do
Yeah.
create things, they call it cognitive behavior, and I call it universal law. So you got to
Yeah.
be careful. And you also got to know if you're on the right path. Because so many people, like I was just working with this woman recently on this random site, and she's like, I have all this calling to do this. And one of her inventions
Mm-hmm.
just made, like, not hers, that somebody that she was going to do did it, like $18 million. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
I said, she goes, I hate this job. I'm like, what? How much did you say? Did you what? What did you say again? And she came in. She goes, I came in for a therapist. You're like a spiritual life coach or something. She goes, I was just saying, I prayed and prayed for someone to use universal, wisdom. And I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
well, 18 million. Every time she says that, I said 18 million, 18 million. She had so many ideas. So,
Wow.
like, it's, I mean, and she has 3 kids. It was very difficult. And I think she's ready. And when she's ready, when you're ready, the teacher will appear, the right therapist, the right coach, the right organization, because the universe is conspiring for your own evolution. You are here to be a dynamic being. If your life is hard, it's because somewhere underneath, you're very dynamic and very powerful.
Mm.
Very
Wow.
powerful. Nobody would be threatened by you if you weren't powerful, and there's a lot of, power out there in the spoken word, and, there's power out there in who you are. And, there's a lot of great books. Like, don't be bamboozled by these images of, like, who's supposed to be out there and doing what. When your work is good and clean and ethical and high, the right amount of money and situations will come find you. We
Yeah.
all have to pay for our deeds, and, in some ways and somehow. So, if people get ahead by being manipulative and liars in this, I don't know, that's not going to be so it's just. And then people need to know the skills, like, how do I do it?
Mm-hmm.
There's great books out there. A wonderful book, Dynamic Laws of Prosperity, great book about working energetically with the universe. Wonderful book. It's an old book.
Mm-hmm.
Think and Grow Rich. There's one, the regular one, and there's the black version, Think and Grow Rich. So there's many ways that you can shift your consciousness and
Mm-hmm.
shift your reality. It takes practice. It
Yeah.
takes, practice over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Support.
And I just want to go back to what the one person talked about when somebody's intimidated by you, right? Or triggered by you. Just like what you said, right? So they are intimidated by your power. So again, that is a sign. If somebody can't really, wow, like I just appreciate what she brings to the table. If they can't recognize that, again, really think about if this is the place for you, right? So, Carolyn, as we're winding down, I'm wondering if you could share with the audience what resources or services or products that you might have to support Black women in our healing.
Sure. So I am, a therapist. I am a spiritual life coach and a healer. I've done remote healing and other things to help people centered. I have classes online. I have 2 books I've written. One is To Honor Your Spirit, which is my journey as an energy healer and a therapist, and how I combined it. Because, by the way, therapists are not supposed to do hands-on healing, but the universe wanted me to do it, because the energy healing, actually, I realized it's healing souls, and it heals the soul level, and it heals ancestral healing. So when all this stuff came up with Black Lives Matters, and we are, maybe the second generation that can really heal ancestors. Because our ancestors, they didn't have a voice, they didn't have a time to heal. They didn't have so the energy healing does that. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, that's why I did this stuff. So everything in your life, it's going to make sense. And then this is just a quick book I wrote about all my newsletters, Soul Wisdom. And then I'm on Instagram, Conscious Creations. I have a meditation and healing center in Connecticut. I went back home. And then also Instagram, Conscious Creations. And
How will people purchase your book, Carolyn?
oh, it's Amazon. It's on Amazon. They're both on
Okay.
Amazon. And
Okay.
Yeah, it's about, working with the universe and how, it's being harassed. That whole story I told is kind of in there, but other things too, and how
Yeah.
that you can kind of create a more abundant and clear karma energetic, and also like how I was able to weave my life without being too, whenever I was beaten up by harassment, it was always a step to something higher, step to something
Mm,
higher. It was almost like universe is like, oh no, that wasn't your contract. So we got to
mm,
reframe the way we look at it. You would not, all these things would not happen unless you had a higher calling. And the
yeah.
light is threatening, but it's threatening to people that are working in the darkness. Maybe that's part of your job.
Ooh,
Mhm.
yes, 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 yes. So, and Carolyn, if someone wants to work with you, how would they contact you through Instagram?
Instagram or my website's intuitivesoulhealing.com. And they can look there and then send me a text on my phone number is right there. Text is the best for me. And I do remote therapy, just regular therapy, and coaching, which is very similar. Yeah.
Mhm. This is very powerful. So I just want to say to everyone, I love, love, love the level of engagement today in terms of the chat. And so many people really resonated with the conversation, right? In terms of so many of us having these common experiences. My main takeaway for all of us is that we know that we deserve better, for us to know our worth. And as Carolyn said, sometimes the harassment happens to push us to a higher level, right? So we are never saying to anyone to sacrifice yourself, but we are the light in the darkness, right? And so we recognize that we are the light, but when we are put in situations where people try to dim our light, that's a
Mhm.
sign that that's not the place for us. Okay. So, in what ways can we start making our exit plan? And in what ways are we in community and sisterhood with one another so we support one another? If you do recognize that you are in a toxic work environment, and it's impacting you negatively, physically, mentally, spiritually, please really pay attention to that because there's so many of us who are getting really sick, right? And so
Mhm.
please pay attention to that. Please take care of ourselves. If you need to get therapy, please get therapy and do these things because we need all of us, right? We need all of us present. We need all of our talents and our gifts because we have so much to give. And again, if anyone, anything tries to dim your light, that is not the place for you. Okay. So again, I want to thank you, Carolyn, again for joining in the discussion today. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in. A lot of engagement, very much appreciated. I'll
Mhm.
include all the information that Carolyn mentioned in the description section on the YouTube channel, Lifting Us with Climb Consulting Wellness Services. So everyone have a good evening, and I will end the broadcast. Carolyn, if you could stay on for a few minutes.
Sure, absolutely.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.